Thank you very much, Herb. Thanks for inviting me to speak. And I'm going to let the slide down a bit by having some notes to refer to while I'm speaking, just to keep me on time. I'm going to start by showing you this image, which is my computer desktop. A lot of people run a mile when they see that, maybe for good reason. I'm going to come back to this image and talk about it a bit. There's a writer called Nick Cohn who wrote a book about the history of pop music called A Wop Bop a Loo Bop. And Nick Cohn also wrote a book called Heart of the World, which is a story about Broadway. It's the history of Broadway in New York, but it's also his story about the people that he met whilst traveling up and down Broadway, probably in the 90s, I think. And he meets a character in that book who's a taxi driver who lives in his cab and has a drum kit in the back seat. And this guy describes himself as a collector of farces. And I like that description a lot. And it made me think that across all the different things I do, I'm a performance maker, I make installations, I write fiction, I put work in public space. The thing that ties them together is that I also think of myself as a collector, not so much a collector of farces, although I do like that idea. I see myself more as a collector of language. And I collect language, I collect text in lots of different ways. One way that I do that is by photographing bits of language out in the world where I see it. So here's a few things from my neighborhood in London. This was Jackie at the local laundromat. She was a notorious note leaver in the laundry. And I also collect language by screenshotting on my computer. This is some list of Wi-Fi networks observable. I have hundreds of these. And I also screenshot the kinds of error messages that your computer is sometimes throwing at you. I'm sort of fascinated with this kind of language. The main way that I collect language, though, is that I write stuff down. It can be things that I've thought of, but it can also be things that I overhear or find in books or in newspapers or online. It can be short texts, it can be lists of things, it can be single words, it can be phrases. And I'm kind of collecting language in that sense, maybe because I think I might use it later for something. Maybe, I don't know why I'm collecting, actually. I'm just gathering things. And I suppose the criteria is that I try to collect things that are somehow compelling to me, but I don't necessarily know why or in what way exactly. What I tried to do was to write a list of the kinds of things that are there in my notebook. So I'm just going to spin through those pretty quickly. Vivid, emphatic, or categorical statements, especially things that seem very, very simple, but because they're so simple, they also start to seem very complicated, almost contradictory. Out of context lines of dialogue, so things people have said, things people say that I overhear, stuff from movies, books, people talking behind me on the bus, all of those things. The beginnings of stories. Vivid images, like visual things that I might see, again, in the real world or maybe in a movie. Descriptions of journeys, views out of windows. Violent things, something about language and violence. The violence of language. Statements that are to do with half-life, like things that are appearing or disappearing. Stuff about political events, news events, specific notes or memories that are to do with my life. So it might be about my kids or about lovers or about family, notes on those things. Specific events that I've witnessed. There's a fight in the street outside the house, or something weird goes floating by in the river. Again, might be from a film, might be from real life. I'm fascinated by the stories that people tell you. You know, when people say what their brother did when they were in Australia, or what their grandfather was doing, you know, just after the war. These kinds of things where people narrate it to you. I'm often then trying to make some notes on that when I get home. General thinking about things, all kinds of stuff. Made up names for things. I seem to generate a lot of those. Made up songs, made up movies, made up TV shows, dreams also. Materials presented without opinion. That's quite an important one for me. I like this idea that language can set things down economically without comment, without explanation. That language is a way to sort of put things there in front of people without apologizing for what you're doing. And I'm fascinated when I'm writing stuff down with the idea that how you write something down might let the thing that happened happen again. So it's about not trying to get in the way of what you're recording, this idea that actually what you're doing is putting the thing in front of people very simply and in an unambiguous kind of way. I'm just going to spin through a few images from my notebook. I don't keep a physical notebook anymore. I did for years and years and years. These days I just dump stuff into a Word document that's endlessly long. It's like hundreds and hundreds of pages. So I don't anymore handwrite. This is an example. This is examples of my handwriting when I could actually still write. It's probably back in the 90s. Everyone else is asleep. All the world is asleep. Exhibition of dust. I always think this is a nice thing. Recession buster breakfast. I think that was at a service station somewhere on the A1. And back to the messy desktop. People do run sometimes when they see that. It reminds me that there's no system to my notebook. It's just everything piled in there. I think about the notebook as a kind of bottomless pit into which language and things that fascinate me are thrown, or a cupboard that's, you know, endlessly deep and dark, and everything can kind of go in there. And the process, once stuff's gone in there, is that I periodically take things out again in order to examine them, the things that I've collected. And the thing that interests me then is to take those fragments of language that I might have written or I might have overheard, and try to think about them and figure out what they might be, what they might mean. And one of the ways that I might do that would be in a performance. So I might take a line that I've read or invented or seen in another context and say those words again, or have somebody else say them again in another context. And for me, that's about trying to understand what I've collected. What is that? And by speaking it out in public, having somebody else speak it out in public, it's a way of trying to understand what that material is. A fragment that I've collected might be the beginning of a story, might be part of a performance, or it might be an artwork, a sign, a neon sign, or a drawing. Revisiting or reusing the language is trying to understand it, trying to see what it can do, trying to see what kinds of feelings or relations or what things that language can make happen when you put it in another context and when it meets other people. In the last 15 years or so, my practice has gone from being very largely based in performance towards working a lot more in galleries and in public space with neon and with LED installation. And the first of those works that I made was in 2008. There's a neon sign that said, "Wait here, I've gone to get help." This was in Durham. This was in Lumiere in, I think, 2009. And I'm going to just spin through some images of these kinds of works. So let's go through. Also Durham, at the train station, 2010. Derby, right now. I'm from Derby. This is in the Ruhr in Germany. It's Warsaw. Folkestone. Coming and going is why the place is there at all. Athens. Sheffield. Rome. London. Manchester. One of the ways that I think about these works is that they're two things at the same time. They're very specific, they're very particular, and they're very open. And they have to be both of those things, otherwise they're not interesting to me. By very specific, what I mean is that they all suggest something very particular. They throw a particular idea, maybe a particular story, a particular energy into the world. So in that sense, they're very open. And by very specific. And by very open, what I mean is that some things are not made clear. So if you think about the very first one that I showed, "Wait here, I've gone to get help," it's not clear who has gone. It's not clear why they've gone to get help. It's not clear whether they're speaking to you. It's not clear when this message was left. It's not clear whether it would be a good idea to wait or just actually make a run for it now. And because all those things are unclear, there's a kind of space that you can enter as a reader, as a person who comes across that work in a public space. Or like this work here, "Everything Up in the Air." What is up in the air? In my life, everything's up in the air. In this country, everything's up in the air. Everything's up in the air, just the sign is up in the air. It's not specified, and because it's not specified, there's a space that you can enter. The other thing about that is that not finishedness is important, because it means that when you move the work from one place to another, this is Paris, this is the Pompidou Center, this work's there now. Qu'y a-t-il entre nous? What is there between us? What's going on between us? When you move the work, because it's not finished, different things can happen. So this is a work, it's called Let's Pretend. Let's pretend none of this ever happened. This is Lisbon in 2014. This is the same work in Blackpool in 2016, round about the time of the Brexit kind of referendum, I guess. And this is that same work in London at Bloomberg SPACE, also as part of Lumiere. And when this work moves from place to place, it means something different. I had email when it was in Lisbon from somebody saying their tour guide had told them it was there because the Inquisition had a headquarters on this square. Was that true? And I said, well, I didn't know about this. But if that's what's on your mind and if that's what your tour guide's told you, for sure, that's one of the things that's activated when this work is in that place. there in Blackpool, 2016, it was very hard not to think about Brexit and the kind of economic context of that time when you saw that work here. In Bloomberg SPACE, financial institution in the heart of the city in London, it was very hard not to think about money and about the crash and about all of that kind of economic context, but in a very different way than in Blackpool. And because the work's not finished, it's visible in a different way. I'm going to go very quickly now. These are works that are sort of changing as they go from place to place. Something different comes out. This is my work that's out at Seaham. Here it is in Newcastle, and there it is yesterday in Seaham. And I'm just going to say very briefly a couple of things about this work. This is Shifting Ground. It was commissioned by Lumiere for this edition of the festival, and it was made specially for Red Hills. And obviously I was thinking about this place as a place for the miners, for the union, and the idea of the labor, the hard labor of those workers, the political power, what's happened to that political and economic power, how we're thinking about climate and climate change and fossil fuels, how we're thinking about the shifting political grounds that are happening right now in the UK, Brexit, nationalism, and so on. This idea of this sign as a warning, like you might get by the side of the road, watch out, shifting ground, but also shifting ground as a declaration that there might be possibilities. Things are changing, things are up in the air. Here we are at a moment where different things might be possible. And again, it's a work that floats that very broad set of questions, but it leaves a lot there that's not specified, precisely so that other people can do that work and get in there and multiply the meanings that are there in that phrase. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Just one quick question. One of the things that struck me, we talked a little bit about this prior to this, is can you just, how does something like these works that you create, and obviously the one on top of this building right now, how do you actually create, neon of that size? I don't see many shops that I think could go to do that.
I'm very lucky. I have several different sets of fabricators, people that I work with in different places. This work, and a lot of my work's been made by an outfit based in Wakefield. I've been working with them for about 10 years. They have both physically made and then often installed the work in different places. Yeah. And when I make work internationally, I'll often work with local fabricators to make things.
And then in terms of actually, does it come in letters, or does it come as a single,
Well, it's always it depends on the scale of the piece. Small piece can be a single piece of bent glass. Piece like this one is individual letters. Seaham is like 5 articulated lorries of 45-meter long construction on massive RSJs.
Sorry, what's an RSJ?
Like an iron girder, right, basically, to sort of hold it all stable. Yeah. And since it was in Newcastle, that work's been in a field out with the guys who made it. It was going to have to be destroyed, and Neon Circus, who are the fabricators, said, well, we can put it in the field outside the workshop if you want. So it's been sitting in the middle of nowhere. I occasionally get Instagram messages from people saying, Tim, what, is this your work, and why is it in a field, not plugged in? You know? And I was just very happy that we managed to find such a perfect location for it in Seaham to show it again.
Fabulous. Tim, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Cheers.